Thank you so much. And hopefully everybody can hear me okay at the back. Awesome. You'll understand in a second why I asked that question. It does relate to a story. So I'm going to talk about, as mentioned, the business of storytelling today. And why I think this is crucial is because when we're in the sales world, and how many people here are in sales? Okay. I'm in the right room. If you know you're in sales, I'm in the right room. We're all in sales. And when it comes to storytelling, my experience is story, as you see up there, selling is one of the most effective ways to build relationships with clients and to show them what you have to offer versus the hardcore. Anybody remember the Benjamin Franklin close and the various different sales closes? My experience is storytelling now, at least, is the way to go. You know, those hard closes may have worked years ago, but as you probably see, buyers are very, very astute. They can go online and research what you're telling them. And so those traditional closes, like the puppy dog close, maybe don't work as well as they used to. And so storytelling or story selling, in my experience, is not only an effective way to win the client over, but it actually is a better way for them and you. And you build stronger relationships. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. And of course, I'm going to start off with a story. That would probably make sense, wouldn't it? So first, actually a question before I jump into the story. How many people here, if I could get you a stand-up comedy gig tonight at a Florida comedy club, at an Orlando comedy club, how many people here would jump on the stage tonight with, okay, before I even finish, I have seen 3, 4, 5 hands, 6 hands, 7. Let me go further into that. If you didn't have time to prep and you had 5 minutes notice. So this is weird. More people would jump up if they had no preparation. Now if I asked how many people if you were drinking would do it. Even more hands. Okay, so interesting thing here is I tried to count as quickly as I could, but the counting sometimes doesn't help anyway. And I'm going to explain in the story. But what I've discovered is even the people that say they'll jump up in a stand-up stage, when they actually get to the club and they're about to jump up on the stage, sometimes things change. And I'm going to back that up in this story. So back in 2002, I was invited to try my hand at stand-up comedy. What happened was I had a stage play in a festival, and I was terrified of the stage. Terrified of being in front of any audience, even of 5. And so in the play, one of the actors sprained his ankle, and all of a sudden I had to, of course, who else knows the lines other than the actors? The person who put the play in the festival, right? The writer-director. So that was me. I never wanted to be on a stage. I always wanted to be the guy that you see in the little basement with webs growing over them that just wrote stuff. And nobody ever saw. But I obviously I wanted to see my play come to life. And so what happened is now all of a sudden the actor sprained his ankle and he could still do the parts, but he needed more time to get to the back. So I needed to write in a character that wasn't in the play. So that's what I did, and I had to be that character. But I was so terrified of being on the stage that I wrote the character so that he could actually have his back to the audience the entire time. And I also put a wig on. And if anybody watches wrestling, I put on a Hulk Hogan wrestling shirt. And so this is my way of not being noticed at all. And so I wrote that, and how I did that, by the way, because that might sound strange, but the main character was a busker on the streets playing guitar, so I just happened to be the passerby that was, requesting songs. That's how I wrote that character. And I actually wrote the character so I wouldn't have to face the audience. I developed it on purpose like that. So all of a sudden, when I heard about the stand-up comedy workshop, I said, you know what, I don't know if I'll ever get on stage, but I got to give this a try, because I need to be able to get on stage if that happens again. And so, how many people here have been to Toastmasters? Toastmasters is an international speaking association. So quite a few hands. So I had been to one Toastmasters meeting at that point, and so I learned a couple things. I'm going to tell you what it was in a second, but I realized with Toastmasters that if you're going to get on the stage, you got to give it a try. You got to take action. If you're ever going to get on a stage, you got to take action. And so I went to this workshop. We went for 2 weeks, and all we learned was here's how you adjust the mic stand, and that Jerry Seinfeld rules. So the guy was a fan of Jerry Seinfeld, and he told us all about Jerry Seinfeld, and then he told us how to adjust the mic stand. Number 1 fear in the world above death. Does everybody know what it is? Public speaking. So what Jerry Seinfeld, ironically, said in one of his specials is what that means is for the average person, if you were at a funeral, you'd rather be in the casket than doing the eulogy. So the idea of performing stand-up and all your training is here's how you adjust the mic stand. You can understand why that's a little nerve-wracking, right? But week number 3 is what I was excited about. Week number 3, we were going to watch people entertain us. So we're going to go to the comedy club and somebody's going to be entertaining us. And then we were going to talk about what they did. So we go to the comedy club about 5 minutes to show time. We asked where the comics are, because we filled the place. We promoted that show, filled the place. So we asked the guy putting on the show and put on the workshop, where are the comics? Does anybody see where this is going? We didn't, somehow. So he said, when we asked him where the comics are, he turned to us and said, you're looking at them. You're it. You guys are it. So we found out we were the comics with 5 minutes notice. That's why I asked how many people if I added in 5 minutes notice. Now, you guys were eager. More people said they would do it if they had no notice. We weren't eager. So all of a sudden now everybody's at the front of the stage talking about who's going to go up first. And this is where my Toastmasters training came in. But everybody's talking about who's going to go up first. So now it's like 8 o'clock, 5 after 8. I went to the bathroom to try to find an exit window. There wasn't any exit window in the bathroom. When I said to you that not everybody that says they will, there were 15 people that paid for that workshop. Most of them entertainers, like they did film and stuff like that, but not on a stage. Out of those actors, actually some of them were acting in stage plays, so they were on stage in front of people. Out of those 15, 8 walked out the front door when we found out we were going to be performing. So less than 50% stayed, and they paid for the workshop, and they were in the performance industry. So that's why I say not everybody that says they'll go up on a stage will. Now, so there's 7 of us left. The new debate is, who's going to go up first? So I said I went to Toastmasters. What I learned was, if you're going to face a fear like public speaking, what should you do? Go first. Don't watch everybody else start sweating and passing out. Go first. So what I did was I jumped on the stage, grabbed the mic. Now at this point, it's 10 after 8, 10 after showtime, and the comics there are still debating who's going to go up first. They didn't realize I had jumped on the stage. So I pulled the mic out of the stand, and I told what I thought was the best joke that I ever told in my life. To dead silence. So dead silence. And the sweat starts coming down my face, and I realized the stand-up comedy thing may be a little tougher than I thought. But I figured I took the hardest step, right? I was on the stage, so why not go into joke number 2? So I told joke number 2, which I thought was at least the second best joke that I could tell. And this time, nothing changed. It was the same thing. You ever heard of a tumbleweed? I think a tumbleweed went by the stage. And you know, they say you heard the cricket in the room. I heard the cricket. Everything you could think of, it was a mess, is what I'm trying to say. So finally, Guy calls me over to the corner of the stage, the person that got us into this mess, and gives me one of those schmucks on the back of the head, and he said, "You idiot! We haven't even turned the mic on yet." So this was the first time I ever took a stage in my life. And that's why I asked you at the first, can you hear me at the back? Because the one lesson I took away is to always make sure your mic is turned on. So there was a reason I started with that story. I think it introduces you to me a little bit, hopefully breaks the ice a little bit. And I'm going to talk about, I'm not going to necessarily go in through that whole story and say here are the elements, but I'm going to take you through story, and I think you'll see where the elements are from that story. Now let me ask you a question. By me telling you that story, will you remember more about that story, or if I told you facts and figures about stand-up comedy and when it started and what year it started? Probably the story. And that's what we're here to talk about today, because so many people try to sell with facts and figures only. When I was in the office equipment industry, selling photocopiers door to door, actually, how many people would want to do that if I could get you the job? Less hands than stand-up comedy. How crazy is that? So the point is, I sold photocopiers for 10 years door to door. Not an easy business. You know, neither is real estate, but not an easy business. And I sold these photocopiers, and I was always trying to sell with facts and figures in my first few years. And I struggled and struggled and struggled. And I noticed that most of my competitors were doing that. And once I finally realized, which we're going to talk about today, personality types and the importance of that, and storytelling and the importance of that, the game changed for me. But until that point, what would happen? So, and you guys can see this too at the home as well. And you see it with a car when you're buying a car. What would happen is we would say, we got the new scan to email feature. And then my competitors say, yeah, but ours is faster. And you see where this is going, right? Ours has 60, and back then it was megs. Ours has 60 megs. Yeah, but ours has 80 megs. So what happens, right? You just get into this whole battle. It's like the lowest price battle. Eventually somebody's going to have a lower price. So, but the point is not only that, you're not going to build that relationship with a person that makes them want to send other people to you if you sold the whole thing on just features. So that's what I want to talk about today, the importance of the emotional side, which is the story. So what is a story? And by the way, if you notice me taking a peek every now and then at my phone, I'm not checking text messages. I'm keeping track of my time. When I get into the storytelling presentation, sometimes I can elaborate a bit, so I got to make sure I stay to time as well. But the story is the journey of the character you care about, confronting and dealing with an obstacle to reach a pot of gold. That's essentially what a story is. But that can relate to you in any way, really. You can figure out what the character is, who the character is. You can figure out what they're dealing with and what the pot of gold is. For instance, the character could be your client, or it could be actually even a better scenario is a previous client. You're talking to one client and you want to share a story of a previous client that sort of they can relate to and motivates them into action, or they can understand that side more than you just trying to sell them on whatever you're trying to sell them on. So, as an example, the character could be a similar customer to them. The obstacle could be that they were struggling to get the mortgage or get it approved. And of course, the pot of gold is they want to get it approved. They want a new beginning with their new home. So can you see how telling a story like that, here's a client, and of course, don't make up a story. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. Don't make up a story. Hopefully you have a story, but if you're brand new, use the story of a colleague. You don't make up a story, because you'll never remember the facts, first of all. But the truth is, you must have a colleague that has a similar story, right? So chat with them, learn some of their stories, as long as they're okay with you using them, and just say, you know what, one of my colleagues had a customer like that just last week. So they had a customer that was struggling to get the mortgage. And that client, here's what they did to help them. Here was the solution. And of course, the pot of gold is that they got the home. Does that make sense? So how you can relate to that client, that you can actually relate it to them, but this is what the story is, regardless of what the scenario. Any movie you watch, that's what it's about. It might not be really noticeable. Sometimes you watch a movie and you go, what was the plot of that? But there was a plot. Did anybody ever see the movie Napoleon Dynamite? I had friends of mine that I showed it to. I don't always like weird movies, but I like that movie for some weird reason. And I show friends and they're like, please don't ever show another friend that movie again. There's no plot to that movie, etc., etc. But if you look into that movie, those things still exist, even though it doesn't seem like there's a plot. Obviously, Napoleon Dynamite was the main character, and he was just dealing with an obstacle of coming of age and trying to figure out what that looked like. And the pot of gold is trying to do it with at least the amount of failure as possible. Does that make sense? That this is what a story is, and you're going to find it runs through everything. So if you can figure out how to work that into your own stories, that's going to make the difference. And by the way, I probably won't mention this later, but even your brand, like even the real estate brand that you're representing, whether Joan or somebody else, that still exists. You need to figure out who's the main character in that story, what are you dealing with, and what's the pot of gold. Maybe you're just dealing with how can I show more new beginnings to more customers and not let them get taken by somebody else. And the pot of gold is you bring on more new customers that you build great relationships with who now have new beginnings in their life. By the way, where that new beginnings comes from is my grandfather was a carpenter, grade 3 education, a bag of nails and a hammer, and he always said, I'm giving new beginnings away every time he built a new home for a new couple. So I kind of thought of it the same way in real estate, right? You're giving new beginnings away, especially a newer couple. So that's just where it came from. So I mentioned figures versus story. So why does story reach people more than figures? Now I want to preface this by saying as we get later into the presentation, you'll see that there is a time when figures are important. I'm not telling you to not understand the figures. You're going to have clients that are going to ask you, how big is the pool? Or whatever this might be. How far is it from the school? Right? You're going to have those questions. If that's not going to go away, what I'm suggesting is there's a way you can work story into those. But why does it work more? Would you agree that stories connect with us more emotionally than facts and figures do? Would you agree that when the cavemen were telling stories around the campfire, and that tells you the power of stories have existed forever, but they were telling stories around the campfire, they might have had some facts and figures, but most of the stories were about the hunt that day. They probably weren't about what Igbob, I don't know if that's a real name, was wearing. It was probably about how many strides it took, or, what it looked like, or it was like the animal was, maybe it was a dinosaur, I don't know, coming down upon them, and here's what happened, but it was the story. It wasn't about the facts and figures. So my point is that by nature, as humans, we connect more with story. So if you have to tell facts and figures, wrap it in a story. And so just to jump right in, here's an example. So let's say you were selling a home. How close it is to a school might be important to a family, right? That might be important. I'm going to guess that when they say how close is it, they're probably talking how much time does it take to drive there or walk. But they're probably not asking for how many feet. Will we agree with that in most cases? So that would be the facts and figures, wanting to know how many feet. And I'm going to talk, there are some people that want to know that. I'm going to talk about those people in a bit. But the point is, for most people, they just want to know how close it is to the school, let's say. But what if you were to wrap that in a story about why that matters? So as an example, it's a great question you asked. We were always wondering that when we moved to our new homes. And one of the really cool things is when one of our children, Jimmy, whatever the scenario is, was younger, we moved very close to the school, but at the same time we were far enough that by Jimmy walking there, he gained independence in his life. You know, we watched him actually grow. Would that not be more powerful than it's 100 feet from the school? So again, think about what does that mean to the person and share it in a story. The last part there I have is versus Marco. So that, close to the school is one thing, to say how many feet it is. Second thing is why that matters. But let's go even deeper than that. Marco, a really good friend of mine, he found out his son, I think about 3 years ago, has autism. So Marco found out there was a school in a different area, but it was the only school anywhere nearby. So Marco decided that it was important to them to be close to that school because they wanted, Liam is his name, to go to that school. And so what did they do? They moved closer to that school. Now Marco, in doing so, took a loss. He told me he took a loss when he sold his house of around $40,000, and then he overpaid to get the new house. He figures it cost him about $60,000 just to move closer to that house. So my question is, would that story to Marco be more powerful than it's 100 feet away? You better believe it. So what I'm saying is, you need to figure out what that story is and share it with the person. Because it's a benefit to them. You're not manipulating them. It's a benefit to them as well. So in Marco's case, being close to that school was everything. That was the story for Marco. And even me sharing that story with you, if you had, a son that was autistic, that would probably connect with you. Or if you know somebody that does. So again, figure out what the story is. How can you wrap it in? Super quick story. And there is a meaning behind this, because then I'm going to start diving into story a bit deeper. But back in, I guess it's 3 years ago now, my girlfriend and I decided to jump into a car and drive across 26 states in 16 days. Me, her, and a dog. I do not recommend that to anybody in the room. We were only going together 2 months. I don't recommend that to anybody in the world. So the point is, though, we were on this trip and we stopped in Seattle at Jimi Hendrix's gravesite. So we went to Jimi Hendrix's memorial site, and I'm a big fan of music, so that was a cool thing to me. And so we go there, and we stayed there for about an hour. We watched about 5 groups of people come up to the gravesite. Jimi Hendrix, by the way, has been dead over 45 years. It's going on 50. And we were there an hour, and 5 groups of people came up. I bet you there's not a day that somebody doesn't go. So that's the impact he had on people. But here's the impact being there had on me. So while we're there, just about to leave, a guy drives up in a little red car. And he jumps out of this little red car, and he has these cleaning gloves on, and he walks around the gravesite, the memorial site, and he picks up all the litter. And then he jumps in his little tiny red car and drives off. Never said a word to anybody, never talked to anybody. And so I made some assumptions, which you shouldn't do, but I made some assumptions that he probably lives nearby. He probably goes there regularly. He probably doesn't work for the graveyard, because if he does, he's doing a horrible job. He only cleaned up 1 gravesite. But the point is, he came and did that and then just drove off. Now, today I don't have time to, I didn't have time to go into all the details of that story, but that story I've shared many times. Thousands of people over the years. I went into more detail, but I shared that story. And what do you think people remembered about that story? Did they remember that it was at the Hendrix gravesite, but they didn't remember any details about Hendrix. And why didn't they do that? Because the details about Hendrix weren't part of that story. Would you agree with that? It was just to share that's where I was at. And the fact that he made an impact on people. You see the dog in the picture. That was our dog Sprocket. He was 13 at the time. And Sprocket, not a part of the story really. Other than that he was in the car with us on the trip. But my point is, and I'm going to talk about this, why does that story connect with people? The person doing that at the gravesite, cleaning up the litter, what have you. So I want to talk about what stories have in common. And by the way, I think I have 2 slides like this. These are the most wordy slides I have in any presentation I've ever done. I'm not a big bullet point person, but I wanted it all on 1 slide. And so it's so much on the slide, it even goes up over the top this time. But what that says at the top is, what do most great stories have in common? So here's how we get to the meat. Here's where we get to the important part about how do you work this into your career. So all stories, all great stories have a hero. Now here's the thing, you might not know who the hero is on the outside. The hero may be the home, but all great stories have a hero. So what does that mean to you? Your story needs to have a hero. Maybe it's the previous customer, maybe it's the existing customer, maybe it's the home, but you need to have a hero in your story. All great stories should touch on our emotions. So they should pull our heartstrings. They should have some element. So you see, right next to that one I said, what the home is near. That might be in that I talked about Marco, that story. That might be what the emotional connection is. They inspire us and evolve people living their passion. So they inspire us. So remember I said a new beginning? The new beginning might be what inspires us. You tell the story about somebody having a new beginning, and that's what your current client's going through. That might be the inspiration. We get to root for the hero. By the way, I'll add in, we also want to throw rocks at the villain, whoever the villain is. But we get to root for the hero. So it could be the home, it could be another buyer. Only the core elements of the story are shared with us. So when you tell a great story, you're not including all the other little details like the puppy. I didn't talk about the dog for 5 minutes in that story that was only 3. So think about what are the core elements. Also, and I mentioned color of clothing. Like the color of clothing didn't matter, right? They start with a why. Maybe they need a larger home. Maybe their family is expanding. But you need to start with a why. They often have a universal element. Struggling to find the right home could be an example. You know, we've all had that struggle type thing. And then finally, they have to lead to a goal. Now you get the right home. So before I go any further, and I think I have enough time to do this, before I go any further, any questions? Because I'm totally open to questions as we go through. But any questions on that breakdown? Yes, please.
What's the definition of a hero?
Definition of a hero. It's a great question. And I think it varies. So I'll tell you sort of my definition. And I mean, I'm sure there's a dictionary definition, if you will. But to me, a hero is somebody that's facing a battle or a challenge or a struggle, and we want to cheer for them to overcome it. But again, that could be a home. It doesn't have to be a person. But it's somebody that we can root for or something we can root for, but they're going through a struggle. And it doesn't mean we like the hero, by the way. There's heroes that we don't like in our stories sometimes. But that's, to me, it's they're going through a struggle, they're going through a growth, and ideally they'll get there, but we want to root for them to get there. That's what it means to me. Any other questions? I only ask this because this slide is, the bringing it all together slide, so I just want to make sure everything's clear on it. So think about your stories. When you're telling a story, does it look like that? And by the way, I recommend that you sit down and actually craft out your story. You actually sit down and say, what does my story look like? Do I have a hero in the story? Do I have a villain in the story, if you want one? How do we root for the hero? Am I sharing too many details? I'm going to talk about personality types shortly. How many people here have been through any personality type training? Okay, I'm going to cover it very shortly, but I think anybody who's been through it will enjoy it because you've been through it. Anybody who hasn't, this could be a game changer for you. But what I'm going to suggest here, when it comes to the story, is certain personality types will care about the color of the clothing and the details. But it's only 25%. It's only 1 in 4. I'm going to talk about 4 personality types. It's only 1 in 4. So, of course, you want to make sure your story appeals to the majority. So that's why I say the color of the clothing might not be that crucial. But you should be able to recognize, is it a person where the color of the clothing matters? So again, just make sure when you're crafting your story, so all it literally means is write down your story, record it into a phone, whatever that might be, and then ask yourself, does it have these elements? If you took a picture of the slide, does it have a hero? Does it have this? Does it have that? Am I sharing too much detail? And that's how you start to build this. So the question is, why do stories move us into action? Why do they make us buy a home, let's say, more than facts and figures? Anybody want to take a crack at that? Any guesses? Oh, I guess. Help normalize our situation that we can do it so we can relate. Absolutely. I heard somebody else say emotions too. Absolutely. 100%. So stories connect with us emotionally. Any other? Oh, I have one back there. What's that, sorry? Did you say universal? Oh, personable. Okay, awesome. Thank you. Personable. Yeah, absolutely. It engages. Absolutely. So you guys are hitting all the nails on the head. It personalizes it. It engages. We can relate. The big one is emotion. It connects with us emotionally. And that can be good and bad. That could be good emotion, bad emotion, whatever that might be. Any others before I? Because life is a story. That's awesome. Number 5, that's kind of a nice little ribbon. Life is a story. I love it. So 100% true. And that, again, we live it. This is with us every day. We're within a story. We're telling our story whether we like it or not. So we can all relate. So absolutely. And again, what I've experienced is they'll move us, stories, will move us into action quicker than any fact and figure you can share. Again, unless, and this is the caveat, unless you're dealing with the person that cares about facts and figures only. We'll talk about that shortly, though. So here's the cool thing. When you follow the rules of stories, they don't have to be super short. Anybody guess why I have a cat up on the screen? No attention span? YouTube, I'll add in too. So what's the most popular videos on YouTube? Cat videos. Cats falling over, tripping, whatever it might be, cat videos. So wouldn't that lead us to believe a 5-minute cat video, short story, is what's popular now? And our attention spans are short, and cat videos are popular for that reason. But here's the cool news. They don't have to be short stories. We're led to believe that now. And how many people here watch TED Talks? So TED Talks are typically under 18 minutes. Actually, they have to be under 18 or they won't air your TED Talk. And so even with TED Talks, it makes us believe stories have to be short, right? And I will say it works better if it's short. There's a reason why TED Talks have been viewed billions of times. There's a reason. But what I'm suggesting as well is if you use those formats I told you about earlier, if they have a good hero, if they connect with us emotionally, you're always buying, I don't know if you've heard this before, but you get 8 seconds of time. And you're always buying 8 seconds more. So if your stories has those elements though, and it's engaging enough, and it's universal enough, and it connects enough, and it has enough emotion in it, it doesn't have to be a 5-minute cat video. That's what I'm suggesting. And the proof is, how many people here have ever heard of Brendan Burchard? Expert Academy. So Brendan Burchard is a professional development thought leader, and Brendan Burchard's videos, if you've watched them, are an hour plus, and he gets sometimes millions of views. So this guy, in a time when we're saying short stories are the only things that matter, is actually teaching education and keeping us engaged for over an hour. So again, the proof is if you use the elements right, it doesn't have to be short. But I'll add in, they can be. And I want to share a story with you that I'm hoping you'll Google later. This story was viewed over 100 million times, so I know it connects with people. And you may have heard of this story, but a friend of mine, Dave Carroll, guy on the screen there, United Airlines broke his guitar. So how many people have heard of a guy whose guitar, I already see a hand going up, who's broken? I'm seeing more hands. The song is called United Breaks Guitars. It was a video on YouTube that's been viewed, just the one video, over 15 million times. But his story has been viewed and heard over 100 million times. So he's been on CNN, in Reader's Digest, on The View, telling this story about United Airlines breaking his guitar. So how did this all blow up? He made a 5-minute, roughly, video on YouTube. So this is a short story. And in the video, he just simply told the story about United Airlines breaking his guitar. The longer story is he was traveling on United Airlines out of Halifax in Nova Scotia. He jumped on the airplane with United. They took his guitar on. They didn't get him to sign the waiver. I don't know if you know this, but musicians sign a waiver saying we can break your guitar and beat it up and smash it and you can't do a thing. But the catch was Dave didn't sign the waiver and they didn't realize that. They didn't ask him to. So they broke Dave's guitar, and how he found out is he was looking out the window and a lady yelled, over on the other side of the plane, they're throwing guitars over there. And the guys, and they mimicked it in videos, but they were throwing his guitar in the air, and the other guy trying to catch it. And so he saw his guitar smash, and then he got to his destination and opened it up, and it was a $2,500 Taylor guitar that was worth about $50 when he got there. It was all smashed. Thankfully, he had a second guitar to play his gig, and then he started the journey of trying to negotiate with United for a year. And he said, all I want is $1,200 in travel vouchers, and I'll fix the guitar. So he wanted half the money in travel vouchers. How much would a travel voucher cost United? Nothing, unless somebody was in the seat and maybe $100. Like, it wouldn't cost them nothing, really. And they fought him for a year and said, Dave, it's not going to happen. And it first started out, this is how I know about the waiver. They said, that's why we get you to sign the waiver. So they actually use it as their reason. That's good customer service. So, and that's what, and I'm going to talk about why this story, we all connect with it. But the point is, Dave's guitar was broken. He went to United, said, I need repercussion. They said no. He fought for a year with them, and patiently fought, and nicely fought for a year. And they finally said, Dave, the final answer is no. So he said, okay, I made a decision. The only thing I can work with is my guitar. So I'm going to write a song about you breaking my guitar. And so Dave wrote this 5-minute song, catchy song, about United Airlines breaking his guitar. And he said to the lady, Mrs. Earwig, not Earwig, but Earwig, I'll let you know when the video's at 20,000 views. I'm going to actually send you the link. And so 4 days later, the video was at 1 million views. He thought it would take a year to get to 20,000. It was at 1 million views, and all of a sudden, everybody in his family was working in his kitchen taking phone calls from media, including his 2-year-old son. He said it was just like, hello, Daddy, here. Just, Daddy, hold, is what he said. Here, hello, Daddy, hold. And he was getting media to hold for his father. So what happened was it went viral. And lo and behold, like I said, everybody wanted a piece of Dave. 100 million views later, Dave became a speaker, speaking on customer service. He's done that for 9 years now. He's spoken in Budokan, Russia, anywhere you can think of, he's spoken. He's done multiple TEDx talks as well. And so Dave shared this story in the song, and people connected with it. And I'll tell you a couple of the parts of the story that people seem to connect with in a big way. And it turned into, by the way, Wayne Dyer. Do you guys know who Wayne Dyer was? So Wayne Dyer, Dave wrote a song about one of Wayne's books, and sent it to Wayne's daughter, who passed it on to Wayne, and she told him who he was, and he said, wait, he's the United Breaks guitar guy? You know, this is awesome, he did this song, but I love that story. So he introduced him to Louise Hay of Hay House, and Dave got a book deal through Hay House because of the story that Wayne Dyer just happened to hear in passing. So here's the cool parts about the story, by the way, at the end, is so United Airlines breaks his guitar, he goes after them, they say, no, we're not helping. When it was up around 10 million views, United reaches out to him, and now wants to settle. But, so basically they said, we'll buy you a new guitar, we'll do this, we'll do that. But here's the cool thing, what had already happened is that Bob Taylor, who runs Taylor Guitars, had already invited Dave to Taylor's factory and said, you've done so much for our guitars, you can go in that room and pick out 2 of your favorite Taylors. So United wanted to settle, and they're like, oh, let's make this go away, basically. And he's like, no, I'm not interested. And the end result is, the most he got out of this was United Airlines finally put in a policy that said their employees were empowered to make $150 decisions. So they could offer somebody that. That's the most that they got out of it. But what also happened is United Airlines decided to use it to show their employees for training. And so that's a big win. But here's the thing. Dave was on The View, and Whoopi Goldberg said, and they showed him that. He didn't know about that yet. Did you know that they're showing your video to their employees as staff training? And he said, no, I didn't, Whoopi. And she said, well, I got a question. Are they paying you for that? So the end result is Dave was able to go to United and work at a deal where they have to pay him to show the video slamming them. So I told him his name is appropriate as Dave, right? Dave versus Goliath. It's perfect. And then the other one little part I'll tell you, which is a little FYI, is that if you read in Dave's book, at the front of the book they calculated it, and in 1 month of that story breaking, he had cost United Airlines 10% of their market share. Directly. Anybody want to guess what that was worth? You said more than a guitar? Definitely more than a guitar. The end result was $187 million. Is what Dave from Little Nova Scotia, who recorded his video for $150 at the Fall River Fire Hall, cost United Airlines. So I gave you the long version of that story. But he tells the story in 5 minutes in a video and captivated millions of people. So you can see a story can be short as well. So it can be long or short as long as you have those elements. And if you think back to the elements that I showed you guys, if I can go backwards here quickly, can you see where most of these elements are included? The hero is obviously Dave, right? He's the hero. They touch our emotions. You guys are laughing. There's some people that have had that experience where, it's kind of emotionally connects in the other way. I think it's connecting because we've all had that United experience in one form or another, whether it's an airline or some other way. And it was this person finally, quote unquote, sticking it to the man or woman. So it was like, oh, I can root for this person. So of course they have a hero we can root for, a villain we can throw rocks at. Sorry, United. It inspires us. You know what? I could do something like that. Anybody could do that. And that's what Dave's telling is any employee can do this. Not only that, any customer can. So if you're a company, think about what your employees are doing to your customers. The core elements, I shared more of that story than I usually do, but you notice again I didn't say what the case looked like. I didn't say even what the guitar looked like. I didn't say what Dave was wearing that day. Nobody needs to know those elements. They start with a why. What was the why in Dave's story? It was basically, at least what was he doing? He wanted to impact change. That was his why. He wanted to change the way United did things. And they have a universal element. Again, we've all been through similar experiences from a customer service perspective, and they lead to a goal, again, is change. And in Dave's case, the end result is now he's been able to tell that story to thousands of people, if not millions, in addition to who heard it, naturally. So again, think about your story. Does it have those elements? Here's the other one slide I said is a little bit wordy, so you can take a picture of this one if you want. It only has 4 things on it, but I usually don't have slides that are that wordy. So I will tell you that I learned this through comedy as well. One thing I've noticed is stand-up comics study communication more than anybody you'll ever discover. Do you know of anybody else that would get on stage, or let's say even be in front of a customer, record it for 5 minutes, and then spend 10 hours studying it? Not many, right? Stand-up comics do that. So these are some things you'll notice that if you watch a stand-up comedy set and you watch a really good comic, they're doing these as well. So your stories, what are the main elements? How you begin is everything. Would you agree that if we only have 8 seconds and we don't begin right, we lose people? So how you begin is everything. So think about your story. What's the opening? If you want training in this, go to Toastmasters or watch TED Talks. See how these TED Talks, even just the first 1 minute, you could probably watch let's look up the 25 most popular TED Talks, watch the first minute of each one. It'll take you 25 minutes, maybe an hour if you look at it totally, and then write down, how did they start? What was the impact? How did they pull somebody in? So that could be laughter. They start off with humor. I started off with humor, right? That story I shared. It could be a universal element. We all relate. Well, you could probably all relate to what that would feel like performing the stand-up, right, that night? So think about how you begin. So I began by telling you something that was the pie was on my face. There was some humor involved. There was emotional. There was universal elements. So think about how you start. You can start with a question. So you can ask your customer a question, right? That pulls them in to listen. So that gives you the 8 seconds. You notice how I started? I said, how many people would perform stand-up comedy if I got you a spot tonight? That's the question. So the big thing is you have to pull something, you have to start with something that pulls the person in. So make sure your opening is strong. And it should be the strongest thing because you need to get them in. Would you agree that most people get lost in the middle? When you're telling a story, it's mostly when you're muddy in the middle and they're going, where's this going? What's going on here? My mother is one of those social people who she starts one story and halfway through she's already onto a different story with a different person. And there's no closure in the first story. So she loses everybody in the middle. So again, how do you get rid of that? You remove what's not needed. So I would have lost you with Dave's story if I told those little things I said, right? Clothing, what type of guitar it was, what type of guitar it looked like, the case, all that stuff, I would have lost you. So leave those elements out in your story. When you're talking about a home, leave those elements out. Don't go in, when you're talking about somebody else had a similar experience to you, don't talk about he was wearing brown shoes. Nobody cares. And especially today. Would you guys all agree not all of us, but generally, most people are in a what's in it for me society right now? Sadly. Most people are, if they drive past you and cut you off in traffic, they probably didn't notice you were there. Actually twice that happened to me in the last 2 days at the front desk. I'm standing there like the next person in line and people walking by, not looking. I don't know if they're purposely or not purposely doing it, but then just kind of ease in. So now they're ahead of me, getting to go to the registration desk. And I believe in the Gandhi thing, be the change you want to see in the world. So I don't bother saying anything. I'm just going to be not that person. But my point is, that happens a lot now. People just move their way in and then all of a sudden now they're standing there. So my point is that we're in a what's in it for me society, and if that's the case, leave out the gritty details in the middle that nobody cares about. That's the takeaway. 3-point rules. Anybody ever heard of that? Everything works better in threes. When it comes to a story, stand-up comics always work in threes. This has been universal. It's been known forever. And if you think about it, think about the big stories of the time, right? 3 Wise Mice, 3 Musketeers, and I can go down and down. I could spend an hour talking about threes. But the point is just make sure that if you're sharing a story, you have no more than 3 points. I was interviewing a guy yesterday about TEDx talks, and he said, I'll tell you 3 answers for that question. And he said, you know what they say, right? There's this many questions. This many points. 1, 2, 3, many. In other words, once you get beyond 3, people don't care. It's too many now. So work in threes. If you're going to, and by the way, you can have one thing in your story. This story can be 30 seconds. I'm going to the, minutia, but it can be 30 seconds. But just make sure the most you have is 3, because nobody will retain more than 3. And then finally, your ending should be the second most powerful. You know how I said start with a bang? Then you got to finish with a bang. So in comedy, what we do, if we're starting in comedy and we're writing new material, what we'll do is if we bring material we've already used, we'll bring our strongest joke first. Then we'll try all new material, and then we'll finish with our second strongest joke. So what I'm saying in your story, start strong, finish strong. And it's all about trimming out the elements that aren't needed. This is the red light. If you've been to Toastmasters, which some of you guys said you were, this is whenever you're talking, and they turn on the red light, and then they just start clapping so you can't keep talking, because you've gone over time. In the comedy club, they're not as generous as that. They just shut off the mic. They flick the red light, they give you 1 minute warning. If you go over, they just shut off the mic. So, and that's why I said I watch my phone and I get somebody to tell me when I'm 10 minutes from being done. It's because I've come from that world where you need to make sure you trim the fat. So what does that look like to you? Just make sure you trim out all the things in the story that nobody really needs to hear. Does anybody know who this guy is without me saying? Zig Ziglar. So, and this, by the way, is a very short story, and then I'm going to get into actually the personality types to finish things out, and I think you guys will really find ways you can use this every day. But Zig Ziglar, in his later years, had fallen downstairs and lost his short-term memory. So he was still speaking on stages to 15,000 people with short-term memory loss. Can you imagine doing that? So what he would do is he would go up with his daughter, and his daughter Julie, and she would go up on stage with him, and they would tell stories, and they did the same with interviews, media interviews, and he'd have 15,000 people in the audience. He's sharing the bill with Bill Clinton, Deepak Chopra, and so he's up on the stage, and then he'd say something, and then he'd say it over again, like 15 minutes later. And she'd tap him in the shoulder and say, "Dad, you already said that." And he said, "Yeah, but that guy there in the third row wasn't listening, so I repeated it for him." He still had his sense of humor. So I told you that in what, 30 seconds, we'll say? And I bet you if you go back, and I won't go back and bore you and go back through the elements, you'll find most of those elements. Zig Ziglar being the hero, we can root for him. The villain might be the fall that he had, whatever he was dealing with, the short-term memory loss. But even in a 30-second story you're telling a customer about a home, you can share all of those elements. I just want you to know it can be a short story. This is a buddy of mine, Roger, who is a realtor. And Roger is the person that introduced me to personality types. So first of all, I'll give you guys a resource right now you can walk away with. There's a book called Personality Plus. Has anybody ever heard of it? So a couple of hands. So Personality Plus. Florence, Litimer, is the last name. And that was the book that most people credit as coming up with personality types and defining it into 4 personality types. So that's a book. Highly recommend. You can probably buy it for $15 at Barnes & Noble. So Roger introduced me to that book, and this is kind of, my last sort of official story in here, but Roger, being a realtor, I'm going to tell you how he used personality types within this story. So Roger and his sister-in-law didn't get along. They were kind of like arch enemies. And so they kept going to the family get-togethers for 10 years, and they wouldn't talk to each other, and they would whisper about each other. And so finally Roger's wife, in her infinite wisdom, hands Roger a copy of Personality Plus, and she circled her sister's personality. You see where this is going? And then she handed her sister a copy and circles Roger's personality. And she told them both, just read that, and I won't, come back to me later. And so they both read it because she told them to. And they both read that part, and then Roger said, "I don't know what happened, and I can't speak for my sister-in-law, but something clicked. When I read that book and read her personality type, I realized it wasn't that she was evil, it wasn't that she was my arch enemy, because I could see that my personality type probably ticked her off in some ways. And that alone, he said, changed the game for us. But not only that, he said, then I could adapt to her, and I saw why I should. I could actually adjust to her. So he said, before the next get-together, we were already texting each other, and by the end of the night, we had our arms around each other, Coronas in our hands, singing Friends in Low Places. So it changed his personal life. But he said, maybe this would work in my real estate career. So Roger struggled with, and this won't make as much sense until I tell you the personality types, but Roger struggled with the social, he was a social person, so very social, loved talking about friends, relationships, and what would happen is he struggled to sell to the directors, the red personality types. Does that make sense? He struggled to sell to the people that were, I got 5 minutes, let's make it happen. So Roger would get the people in his office, and he said a half hour later, he was still talking about his cousin and the boats and who do you know down the street, and they were already going, I gotta get back to work. And then on the way back, they're saying, I can't deal with this guy. I'll never get anything done. So he said he was losing those customers hand over fist. After he read this book, he said, I'm going to apply what I learned. And he applied what he learned to the next director personality type that he worked with. And he said it was the first that he knows of, director type personality that he closed. And it was his biggest commission check at that point to date in a 10-year real estate career. Simply because he started understanding personality types. He said before that, he wasn't adjusting to anybody. If they didn't like his social, they would just go out the door. What does that mean? If there's 4 personality types, that means he's losing 75% of his customers every day, right? Just by law of averages. If he's having an equal number of those customers, he's losing 75%. Unless he's attracting the social ones. So the point is, why wouldn't it make sense to know the 4 and then adjust to them? Would you agree with that? So hopefully, if you haven't heard this before, I'll be able to explain it really quickly because this is something I do over a full day training session. But hopefully if you haven't heard before, this will all make sense. How many people did say they heard it before? Did you go with, were you with DISC, for example, or color types? So DISC, I'm seeing a lot. Okay. So you're going to see it's the same personality types. I just call it a color. And so if that's the case, what I'm going to suggest is don't try to change the name. If you know a D and I know it as a red, just know all it matters is you know the personality type. Don't worry about knowing the name. So Why it's important across all personality type or all across storytelling is because if you understand storytelling, it'll work across all 4 personality types. You just need to know how to adjust your story to the personality type. So let's dive into that. So red, who I mentioned first. Red personality type is your director. Anybody deal with a customer that always says, I got 5 minutes, I got 10 minutes, I'm in a hurry? You're probably seeing more of that now, by the way, now that we're also short of time. But I got 5-10 minutes, or they're always looking at their phone while you're talking to them, or they roll their eyes whenever it feels like it's going too long. Have you ever in your life overstayed your welcome with a red personality type and then went, I should have finished 5 minutes earlier? Nobody has to raise your hand and say, I did. I've done it. And I know what that feels like. And reds can be extreme. When they say you got 5 minutes, typically you have 4. So you need to figure out a way to tell it in 4. So what does a red personality type look like? Well, again, they care about benefits, so they care about what's in it for them only. They don't care about the features. They definitely don't want to be told a story with the features or facts or what have you. They care about how's it going to change their life. So it could be like if you're talking to them and there's a deck on the back, a big deck, they're going to care about what that's going to do for their social life, perhaps. Having the parties in the back deck, right? Or if they're buying a specific house or car, it might be about status. So they're not going to care about all the facts and figures and details. By the way, they're probably going to make the quickest decision overall. And typically speaking, this is the good news if you can sell to a red, they usually spend the most money on homes. So, and they usually have risen to the top of organizations as a director, a leader, a CEO, what have you. So that's usually the role you'll find them in. They've risen up the company because they're all about business, because they're all about benefits. You also need to know they're not very emotional. They don't connect emotionally. That's why they can say you're fired and then ask you what dress you're wearing tonight to the dinner you're going to. They don't understand why anybody else wouldn't just go get a new job. Doesn't make sense. So I'll give you an example so you can visualize this and also how it works in real life. I won't have to ask. Everybody here probably knows Steve Jobs, who Steve Jobs was. So does everybody remember when the MP3 player came out and they were selling it as the MP3 player, not the iPod? And what was the sales pitch? You'd hear it all talking about 60 megs, since I mentioned that earlier. Then it was megs. 60 megs. The next one said, I have 80 megs. The next one says, I have 70 megs. Here's my question. How many people in the room here know how many megs, or I'll say it this way. How many songs is 60 megs? See all the hands going up? I see a half a hand, sort of a hand. And if you're putting your hand up, you probably know. You can probably tell me better than I could. But the point is, the average person doesn't know. So if you hear a commercial that says, the newest MP3 player, which you haven't heard of before, and you're a red personality type who doesn't want to be looked and made a fool of, but you don't care about features, and it says it has 70 megs of songs, what's going to happen? Nothing. You're just going to say, I don't know what that means, and I'm not going to walk into a store and have them make me look like a fool, and I'm not going to ask what it means. But here's what Steve Jobs did. Does anybody remember the launch of the iPod? Have you ever seen the video or anything? Does anybody remember the 5 words Steve Jobs said when he launched it? Did I hear it? Exactly. So what he did was he spoke to how many songs it holds. So what he did was he had it with him, which was part of his surprise thing. He said, I wish I could show it to you, etc., etc. Did that the whole talk. And they said, you know what, actually, they did give me one. And then he pulled it out of his pocket and he said, you know what this means to you? It means 1,000 songs in your pocket. So my question now is, how many people knows more what 1,000 songs in your pocket means than 60 or 70 megs? Everybody, right? So the point is Steve Jobs figured out how to sell to reds. So what I'm saying, how does this relate to you selling homes? If you can figure out how to sell to reds, you can sell to anybody. And not only that, you need to put it in terms that make sense to them, easy. Here's the win for me. Here's how it benefits that person. Does that make sense? Whereas, like I say, with the iPod, everybody else was selling this MP3 player, nobody knew how it benefited them. Now, by the way, and I mentioned that sometimes the details do matter, there's one of those personality types that matters to. And they know how many songs that is. But it's not everyone. It's actually probably only 1 out of 4. So the point is you need to know how to sell to the other ones. So again, a red benefits is what you want to know. How can I explain it to them in a way that makes sense? How can I explain it quickly? Because they won't give me a lot of time. How can I make this meeting matter to them? And by the way, if you're sitting across in let's say an open house situation with a red and one of the other personality types, typically speaking, the other personality type will be looking to the reds to make the decision. So you need to know how to talk to the other personality type and work with them to convince the red, but just know the red's going to be making that decision. And how do you know that? By knowing this, you'll be able to read which one it is, but you'll also notice that they're looking to the red over and over again to get their approval. So that's the red. And again, this is the short version, but can you visualize the red when I said those things? The person that's quick, to the point, doesn't care about all the details, the features. They're the person that's saying, Corey, move on to the next color. I'm already bored with this one. Even if they are the red. So that's the red. And how do you adjust? You basically, if they say 5, you take 4. If you need more time, you ask them for permission for more time. When you're talking to them about things, you tell them about the benefits, why it matters to them. You don't get into all the details and bog down. You take less time than you said you would. That type of thing. And so, by the way, to finish this off with storytelling, if you're telling a story to the red, what does that mean? Your story shouldn't have a lot of details. It should be focused on how it's going to help them and benefit them. So basically cater your story to the red. Next one is the yellow, the social. The social one is the, what's up? The wink and the gun guy. He or she is usually a yellow. So typically speaking, whether we like it or not, yellows are typically by nature salespeople. People gravitate to sales typically if they're yellow. Now that, you might say, well, I know yellows that don't seem like that. They're probably adjusting. The majority are yellow, but they adjust, right? They're good chameleons. But a typical yellow, an extreme yellow, like my mother who I mentioned earlier, I didn't say which personality type she was. She's the one that starts the story and then veers off. My mother's that one that you have to have an exit strategy for. So you may have to have an exit strategy for some of these personality types. The yellow is the biggest one. So how do you kind of nicely say, okay, I got to move on. So by the way, how do you work with the yellow? What I do is I usually tell the yellow at the beginning how much time I have. If I can recognize it's a very social person, I'll say, I just want to let you know I have an hour, and I want to make sure we cover everything off. Hopefully an hour works and get their permission. If they say an hour doesn't work, then you'd have to say, well, I guess maybe, should we reschedule? And then they'll make it work within an hour usually. But then when it's coming close to the end of an hour, then I'll also remind them. I only have 10 minutes left. I just want to make sure we covered everything off. So what you're doing, you can see you're leading the yellow. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with any of these personality types. I'm a red and a yellow. So the yellows, again, inside emotionally, by the way, they connect emotionally, so they feel bad whenever they're going over time. They feel bad when they're talking too much. It's just built within them. So just know that with a yellow, they're probably going to be very social. They're going to be relationship driven. They're going to talk about their relationship, about things that relate to a relationship. They're going to be very emotional when they make decisions. They're not going to care, by the way, about benefits or features either. They're not going to care about either. And by the way, if you question this, if you're a salesperson, which again we know we all are, if you're a salesperson and you're yellow, go into a store and try not to buy something. Yellows are the easiest to sell. Because as long as the person builds a relationship with them, that's the deal. The deal isn't about, the features, it isn't about the benefits, it's about the relationship. And I don't know about you, but the yellow in me is the easiest person to sell in the world. But again, just know, yellows are very social. You have to have an exit strategy. When you're talking with a yellow, make sure, by the way, if you adjust to them, that you allow them a little bit of social time. You interact and socialize with them, even if you're a red and you don't want to do that at all. The reds and the yellows are the ones that butt the heads the most. You ever had a situation where you come home and you get in and the person that is already sitting there at the table, maybe the person you're with in your life, and they say, let me tell you about my day, and you go, if not, you're probably not a red. You're the yellow. But the point is that that's a red and a yellow at home trying to get along, right? Is the red doesn't want to hear all these stories, and the yellow just wants to share stories. So now, again, can you see, again, I'm doing this short so it's not as formalized as normal, but can you see now the social ones in your head? Maybe if you know some people in the room from other brokerages or what have you, you're already going, oh yeah, that's that person. Maybe you're already saying, oh, that's me. Whatever it might be. And that's what my hope that happens. If you can visualize that person, there's a better chance you're going to visualize it as a customer. So then, the blue. So the blue is the one I told you about that actually does care about those features. The blue is the one that does care about how large the pool is, how far, maybe even how many steps it is away from the school. So how many people have had the blues? They go on the website, they do all the research, and then they tell you why you're wrong when you give them the answer they ask. So that's the blues. The blues are very detailed oriented. They love features. They want to talk about features all day long. So when you're talking to the blue, they're going to ask you lots of questions about the home. They might ask you the year of the home. They might ask you how big the cubby space is. They might ask you how far, if the bed's staying with the home, how far away it is from the toilet. Who knows? But they're going to ask you all the details. So they want all the details. They want all the answers. They want to go into the facts and figures. And so how do you deal with the blue? You go into facts and figures. But my point, which is hopefully what you've seen all the way along, is they're the minority. They're only 25%. So that's why I'm saying storytelling is so important. The other 75% will relate to storytelling. And the blues, as long as you tell the story in the right way and you include the facts and figures and details, they'll still get behind the story as well. So that's how it works with the blue. And then finally the green. So the green would be that person, and a lot of times we associate them with roles. So if I go back to the blue for a second, it would be the IT manager. You know, a person that's in engineering, that type of role, because they like the facts and details. They don't mind doing research. Finally, the green would be the one that sometimes would be in like an accounting role. They don't want to be out in front. So when you're talking to them, they're kind of shy. A lot of people say they're a people pleaser because they don't like confrontation. Have you ever called a customer a tire kicker? It may have been a green. Because they make really, really, really slow decisions. But people don't know why. Why do they make slow decisions? Because they're scared to make the wrong one. So how do you sell a green? You give them peace of mind. Here's how you're covered. Here's, well, the inspection's going to cover that. So in other words, they'll care about the inspection more than the red will. The red's like, I hope this gets passed so we can just move on. Whereas the green, they're going to want to know every detail about the inspection. So it's peace of mind is what the green's about. So what does that mean to you? Talk peace of mind in your story. So, I had a customer that had that same concern as you, and so that customer, here's what we did, and here's how they got comfortable again, and here's why they love the home now. So you see how you're showing another green customer, which a green customer will love a peace of mind story. So, any of those four, when you're telling the story, think about the story, think about the personality type, and adjust your story to them, and my promise is that'll work better every day of the week than facts and figures. Again, I covered that at top speed. So on the personality types, any questions? Yes? So the question is, how do you really quickly figure out a red, yellow, blue, or green? And so what I would say is there's a couple things. One, ask good questions. The questions that actually lead you to that answer. So for example, if it's a red, like if you ask, here's a good question that will help you cover it off for all four really, is how much time do we have? The yellow will say all the time in the world. The red will say, I only got 5 minutes, I've got to move on to whatever, I have something later. And the blue will say, well, I got a lot of questions. And the green will say, well, I want to make sure I'm covered, and I might have a lot of questions, but I'll come back and ask more later if that's okay, because they're scared to make a quick decision. So just the question of how much time do I have would be a good leading question. The second part I would say is observe. If they get fidgety when you start telling a long story, you know that, okay, they want a shorter story. If you start telling the details and you can tell they're going over their head, okay, I shouldn't be talking details. But if you tell a couple of details and they want more, do you see where I'm going with this? If you ask questions and you observe, then you'll start to see patterns come out. Any other questions before we wind down? So this is basically, I'm going to make sure this is essentially what I'd like to see people do when they leave this room, is figure out what your story is. Who's the hero in your story? What's the heart of the story? How can you connect emotionally? What are the core elements that you need to tell people? How will you get people to root for your hero? How will you inspire people, and what is the why? Why in the first place? Should you humble yourself in the story, put the pie in your face? How can you make the story fun, and what's the goal of the story? So again, feel free to take a picture, and later on, build your story and ask yourself, again, build a story. So how does that look? Is that you could say, okay, well, I had this customer last week, what a funny situation. How can I turn that into a story that I can share with other clients? And then basically say, who was the hero in the story, and go through that. And what my experience is, it might sound crazy to do this little bit of homework, but if you can ask yourself that, I think you'll find the elements of your story, and you'll also be able to leave out the stuff people don't care about. Everybody get the picture of that? Okay. And then the last part is practice. So practice your storytelling. An easy way to do this would be to go to a Toastmasters or Rotary or something and just go and join. I think Toastmasters works out to about $5 a month. So just go there and jump in and get a chance to practice your stories, because they'll take you through all the elements of storytelling and what have you. But if you don't want to go that route and you say, I'm too busy for that, that's fine. Then what I'm suggesting is practice. So start telling stories. Maybe you record the audio side of your story and listen to it later. Maybe you tell the story to somebody else. Whatever that looks like, but practice it. The only way to get better at storytelling is practice. I'm standing up here speaking in front of an audience as somebody who would have passed out doing this 15 years ago. So I can tell you everything gets better with practice. So just practice. And I say this because I have a lot of people that say, I cannot tell a story to save my life, just like I cannot tell a joke to save my life. And what I'm saying is, I know comics that started off that were terrible, that couldn't tell a joke, that are now doing 45-minute sets at comedy clubs and killing. And that's our word in comedy, killing it on the stage. So practice. That's your takeaway. Is if you want to be good, better at storytelling, practice. So, with that said, any last questions? We covered a lot in a little over an hour. Yes? Yeah, back to last slide. Any of the, go ahead. That's one of the most common questions I get about personality types. Can a person change their personality type? And that could be in two circumstances. That could be, you see them one day, are they different than the next time? Or it could be, and I don't know if this which ones you mean, but it also could be, can they change the personality type in the middle of your conversation? So it could be either or. So the question is, can they change personality types? And the answer is yes. So what I tell people, and that's such a great point for this reason, what I tell people is don't focus on Billy is a red, or Billy is a D. Focus on who is Billy at this second, and if I know the personality types well enough, adjust to whoever's in front of you right now. So in other words, Billy might be short and to the point now, and then might change to very social 5 minutes later. So all I'm saying is if you know them well enough, just adjust to whatever's in front of you right now. So the answer is yes, people do change on the spot. So thank you for asking that. Absolutely.
So I was wondering, you're building a story, number 6 is like, what is your why?
Yeah.
Do you feel like that's a good starting point? Or, because like I noticed it's like kind of towards the why.
Yeah. So the question is the why. To start with why, which is kind of actually funny because Simon Sinek's talk is start with why. So go to your point about starting with it. So the question is, should you start with your why when you're building the story? I'm going to always say yes and no. So you don't have to, but it's a good place to start. Has everybody seen that video? Simon Sinek's Start With Why? If you haven't, that's your homework. Watch the TED Talk Start With Why. It might even just be called Why. They've changed over time. But Simon Sinek talks about the importance of, as a company, understanding your why and how that's more important than your what. And he gives the example of why Apple is dominating over Dell. Dell's focused on selling a cheap computer, or a high quality, even low-cost computer, whereas Apple's focused on changing the world. So, what's your why? So the question is, should you start with why? I think it's a great place to start. What's the why of my story? What's the why of why I'm telling this? What's the why of why I'm doing this in real estate? Maybe your why you're in real estate, actually turns into what is the story. So maybe you're telling your own story, and it's built around why did I come into real estate in the first place? Maybe you had a horrible buying experience, and you said, I don't want anybody else to suffer through that. That's your why, and maybe that becomes part of your story that you tell clients. I had a bad experience. I know what it's like. And this is why I got into real estate in the first place. Let me tell you about that. So my answer is yes and no, but I start with why, but I'm not saying people have to. My main thing is as long as you can, so when I put this up, it wasn't necessarily specific order. It's just that I want to make sure you have those elements in there. But yes, the why is a great place to start because some people are struggling with, why am I even telling this in the first place? So, but your takeaway, so thank you for asking the question, for the takeaway is watch Start With Why. That 15 roughly minute TED Talk could change your life. Any other questions? We're good? So, thank you everybody so much. I know how busy your time is. I know there's various sessions to go back and forth to, so thank you so much for joining me today. Any questions, let me know. You can come up afterward, or you can Google me, Corey Poirier. Google me online and just send me a message through my website, wherever. My email's easy, thatspeakerguy@gmail.com. Pretty easy. So if you have a question, just send me an email, come up afterward. Otherwise, thank you guys so much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you, Corey.